Hello, my name is Sam McClure, and I'm an attorney for Melody Bannister and her 4 children, Genevieve, Janelle, Vivian, and Peter. Today I want to share with you some interesting connections between these children's alleged perpetrators. I want to warn you, some of the things you may hear are graphic in nature. If what you're hearing today grips you and grips your heart, I encourage you to visit millstonesofjustice.com, share this video, and donate today to help Melody and her children fight these injustices. In early 2019, Melody Bannister's children began to come to her, sharing with her very graphic retellings of gross sexual and physical abuse that happened to them in their grandfather's barn. This abuse was perpetrated allegedly by the children, by their father, grandfather, and several other older men. The first of the alleged abusers that we want to take a look at is Bill Bannister, the children's father. And I think if we can just pause and try to get inside of Melody's mind at this point, when the children started coming forward with these allegations that their father was participating in their gross physical and sexual abuse, it was rocking her world, and she was trying to absorb it, trying to process if these were credible or not. Bill is employed at a construction consulting organization. He's a top-level accountant, and the children have vivid memories of their father taking them out of their house in the middle of the night, taking to Jay Tuhl, his father's red barn, to be tortured physically and sexually. The next perpetrator we want to take a look at is the children's grandfather, Bill's father, Jay Tuhl Bannister. He lived across the street from the Bannister household, the red barn where the children remember the vivid physical and sexual abuse, most of which we will not talk about in this video, was his red barn. Jay Tuhl was involved in the field of psychology. He was director of the Hermitage House. It was a residential treatment facility for young males. This Hermitage House, I think it's important to note, was started by the community according to the Hope for Justice report, the community being the name for the church that was started through this shepherding discipleship movement. The next alleged perpetrator we want to take a look at is Jim McNally. Now, I think it's important to note that Jim McNally has been deceased since 2015. Even as long ago as 5 years ago, the children have vivid memories of Jim McNally participating in their gross physical and sexual abuse. He was the pastor of Harvest Christian Fellowship and a close personal friend of Jay Tuhl Bannister. Jim taught a fatherhood/sonship message at his church in Virginia, and he did this in various churches around the world. This teaching was based on the shepherding discipleship movement, one of whose leaders was Charles Simpson. The fatherhood/sonship message basically taught that each Christian man should have a spiritual father in a lifelong covenant relationship. They would often seal this covenant by taking communion together. The people who would eventually become disillusioned with Harvest or felt that God would lead them to a different church were told that they had broken covenant with Jim, and it was viewed similarly to having broken a marriage covenant. Those who did leave were talked about in disparaging terms, and in some cases were forbidden contact with those left in the church. In addition, getting any professional help outside the church was highly discouraged. We can see from these indicators that this was a religious community that was very controlling and domineering and did not want any outside accountability. Another member of this group, this shepherding discipleship group, was one of Tuhl's spiritual fathers, Charles Simpson. This shepherding discipleship movement sprang up in the 1970s, and it touted these covenant relationships which bound people in spiritual servitude to their churchly male authority and sometimes bound them for life. They built a lofty pyramid of human power with Simpson comfortably at the top of that pyramid. The next alleged perpetrator that the children name is Mike Nowakowski. Mike Nowakowski lived in the neighborhood, and he was one of the men that the children vividly remember being an active participant in their physical and sexual abuse. Bryant Conlon is the next alleged perpetrator we want to take a look at. He also lives in Stafford County. One of the children's alleged abusers, vivid memories of Bryant Conlon. I think it's interesting to note that the children remember that there were other children with them present many times in the barn. They were part of a large group of children that were brought there at that location on these specific nights. And Bryant Conlon was specifically tasked with overseeing the abuse, the torture, the traumatization of the older children. Ralph Carter is another one of the children's alleged perpetrators. Carter lives in Fredericksburg, Virginia, very close to Stafford. He's another one of these men who actively participated in the children's alleged abuse and also intentional traumatization. Another one of the alleged perpetrators has an interesting profile. Nathan McNally, who's son of Jim McNally, lives in the Fredericksburg area. The children have interesting memories of him, and so they remember him almost being an unwilling participant. He seemed to be tasked with leading the children from one part of the barn where this type of abuse would happen to another part of the barn where this type of traumatization would happen. And one of the children actually asked Nathan at one point, "Why are you doing this?" And he looked down with tears in his eyes and said, I'm sorry," which leads one to wonder what kind of pressure maybe the other older men in this community were exerting on him to force him to participate, yet almost seeming like an unwilling participant. Now, from time to time, the children remember that there would be a guest of honor that would arrive at the barn for the torture sessions, for the abuse sessions. These were maybe a man that wasn't always present, but when he came, he was treated with more reverence and respect. One of these men was Charles Simpson, and they remember an incident where he was given a seat of honor, a group of men in a circle where sexual acts were expected to be performed on them by children, and he was given the seat of honor in that situation. So it wasn't only men that participated in this sex trafficking ring. The children also remember Sheila Bannister, second wife of Tuhl Bannister, who was one of the people that shepherded the children, stood with the children as they were lined up to suffer whatever the next torture was on them while they were at the barn. According to the Hope for Justice report, Sheila was a sad-eyed participant in charge of guiding the children up the barn stairs and guarding them so they would not run away. In the last episode, we talked about a corroborating witness other than the children that came forward after Melody was arrested in Hendricks County, Indiana. That was Rebecca McCullough. And I think it's important here to pause and to remember that it's not just these children that remember this. It's not just a nationally recognized forensic psychiatrist who has validated that what these children are remembering is credible, but also we have somebody unconnected to the Bannisters who's come forward and say, ding, 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 I was also there, and I was also tortured, raped. Again, Rebecca McCullough, in addition to the perpetrators that the children named, many of them, she also named the current sheriff of Stafford County, David Decatur. So the Hope for Justice report goes into some more detail about what she remembers, where she was, and the dates. The first time that Rebecca McCullough was in the barn was in 2013. She was 14 years old. This was an unknown location to her. She couldn't recall being transported to the barn, but she does remember that she was selected to be taken to the barn because of her previous experience of being trafficked earlier in her life. She recalled in the barn seeing William Bannister and other men present with him. She remembers between 10 to 13 other children in the barn. They varied in age, but most were younger than her. Rebecca remembers being stripped naked by the men. Her hands were tied over her head, and she was beaten with a whip. This was on the lower level of the barn. After being beaten with the whip, she was tied up and suspended from the ceiling of the barn. Approximately 5 to 6 men raped her at that point, made the children stand around and watch her being raped. She was made to wear an electric shock collar. After she was raped, she was made to watch the children line up and get whipped by various men. She was placed in a chair in the center of the floor in the barn and made to watch very, very vile and graphic things happen to the children. After she cleaned up and she got dressed, she remembers one of the men that were involved in this abuse passing a roll of money to an unidentified man wearing a suit. This individual in the suit then placed Rebecca inside of a vehicle and transported her to another unknown location. The second time Rebecca was at the barn was again in 2013. She was 14 years old. When she arrived at the barn, she was made to change clothes, wear lingerie, a chain around her neck, a leash attached to the collar. She was led around. She remembers 6 to 7 other girls being present at the barn. She remembers being forced to perform sexual acts on Bill Bannister, was raped by Bill Bannister, and then Bill used the leash to lead her around the barn. The last time she remembers being at the barn was in 2015 when she was 16 years old. She was taken to the back of the barn and was told that she had to torture children that were inside the barn. She felt like she was under the control of these handlers and she was forced to do it. Approximately 10 children were there, a mixture of boys and girls, and about 7 men present. The children were whipped. They were made to stand in a circle and close their eyes. The men walked around the outside of the circle and used an electric prod, almost like a cattle prod, to shock the children until they collapsed. She was drugged and then taken away from the barn. She specifically remembers Jay Tuhl Bannister, Mike Nowakowski, David Lee, and David Decatur. Now, this is all consistent with what the children have also alleged as far as location and method of operation. I think it's also consistent with how this category of sex trafficking works, seeking to intentionally traumatize the victims. Another important component of Hope for Justice's investigation was a digital footprint analysis or forensic computer investigation of the alleged perpetrators, which brought to light some interesting commonalities. Many of the things in those reports or in that research we can't share, but I think 3 are important to share. First of all, some background. If the normal 65-year-old man that plays golf and smokes cigars is expected to have a bell curve of a digital footprint, and if this bell curve goes outside of that standard deviation, if there are factors that are indicative of child sex trafficking, then that starts to raise red flags. If this 65-year-old man has one of those factors, that raises eyebrows. If he has 2, 3, 4, then that brings to bear that there may be some things going on behind the scenes that are illegal. So 3 things that this digital footprint brought to light that we can talk about is a Czechoslovakian server that's known to be a hub for child pornography, Minecraft accounts, and signing up to various pornography sites. So many of the alleged perpetrators had these things in common. This Czechoslovakian server, this known hub for child pornography, several of the perpetrators had in common. They had accessed this, they had signed up for it, they were participants in this. This is Bill Bannister, Sheriff David Decatur, and also an affiliate of Charles Simpson were also signed up to this Czechoslovakian server. The second window that we can look into their digital footprint is Minecraft accounts. Many of you know that Minecraft is a child's game, but probably it's not widely known that Minecraft is also a common way to hide child pornography. Within the Minecraft game itself, data can be stored and it can be accessed. And this is one of those indicia that law enforcement may look at to see, is this person trafficking in child pornography? So several of the alleged perpetrators had Minecraft accounts. Why would a grown man voluntarily sign up? It could be lots of reasons. Maybe it's something, maybe it's not, but it is, again, one of those factors outside of that bell curve. Bryant Conlon, Mike Nowakowski, Nathan McNally, and David Decatur. And so the third factor is access to bizarre pornographic sites, and I think this thing runs through many of the alleged perpetrators, and we have evidence of that through Hope for Justice's computer forensic analysis. The last piece of evidence that I think is important to bring to light that Hope for Justice discovered was an electronic device recovered from the Bannister home. Now, this electronic device showed some really bizarre behavior as we dug into it. We analyzed it on a very deep level. We noticed that there were 177 different credit cards run through this one electronic device, access to many overseas servers, the kinds of things that aren't typical for someone in this station of life that's just living an ordinary life to do. Why would there be 177 different credit card transactions run through this electronic device out of the Bannister home? Why would there be hundreds of accesses to overseas servers on this electronic device? It definitely leads an investigator to dig more. What's going on there? What's happening behind the scenes? Thank you for watching this second episode that's unveiling some of the evidence to corroborate the allegation that Melody Bannister's children brought to the table. Genevieve, Janelle, Vivian, Peter. These children's allegations are credible. We can see that from the forensic psychiatric evaluation, from the Hope for Justice report, from the digital footprint analysis, and the corroborating evidence from the electronic device recovered from the Bannister home. We want you to help support Melody Bannister and her children. Please visit the website of Millstones of Justice today, millstonesofjustice.com. Share it with your friends and donate to help Melody fight for justice for her children.